What we're gonna do right here is go back, way back.
Okay, so we're going to start off with a couple of things that I was asked in the Waves group literally the other day, and they were talking about bass and also breaks. And so I'm going to go over a little thing on how I like to use various programs for my breaks, and then a little thing on bass. And if you guys have any more questions, put them in the comments and I'll see if I can cover them. So one of the things that I used to use for breaks, which was really, really good, is Reason and a Dr. Rex player. So when it comes to jungle and making that sort of thing, for me, you have to have something that's going to mash up the breaks properly and give you a lot of versatility in how you want to change them. So with this, I was always being able to do quite a few things in one go. So here's a little Apache break. Just bring it down so you can hear me. So some of the things in here that you can do very quickly, and you can audition this while you're playing whatever you're playing, you know, your track for it to go in. So some of the things is the envelope of them. So if you want to get it shorter and snappier. Also changing the pitch of the break, super quick. So you can just really, really play around with, you know, the pitch of it, seeing how it fits into your track, etc. And the other thing I'd like to show you on this is the little pitch envelope, which the filter envelope actually controls. So you can play around with the pitch as well, which is always fun, and you can get plenty of different sounds out of one sort of thing, basically. And recently, so it's got a bit of a Blue Peter job, something I've made earlier. So recently I've got something else called Regroover Pro, and this is something I really, really like for breaks. So I've put Amen in there. The Amen has come from an old sample pack I've got. I think it's called Proctor's Amen or something like that. And I've split it up, and then I put it into the editor so that I've got individual hits that I can then program. Because with jungle breaks, I think it's really important to program them and have the ability to program them in MIDI. You've just got so much more versatility with doing edits than you have in audio, and then eventually you can, you know, pull it over to audio for further processing, etc. But for getting it going, MIDI is great. So if any of you guys have any questions, get them in there. These guys are just sharing it about, and then they're going to keep an eye on the questions and comments, and I'll carry on with the next thing, which was bass. Someone was asking, I think it was Dan, big up Dan Subterfuge. He was asking about bass and jungle bass, and so is like a Blue Peter job I've done earlier. This is the Waves Codex synth, named after my mate Dave that's here, and they've got another synth called Elements, so we like that. They've named both their synths after me and my mate. Not really, but yeah. So here it's a wavetable synth. It's quite simple, everything on the front. I do like other synths. Massive's one of my go-to synths, but I haven't actually loaded complete onto this computer because it's not big enough. And you'll have to bear with us with this computer. It's only a dual core, and yeah, I'm really trying to do stuff on it, and it's maxing out and peaking. So I won't get too much going, but we'll do some sort of basic things to show you some bits. So with this, I've loaded two oscillators. This is the oscillators up here. I hope you can see that. Have you got? Yeah, you got the screen on there. That's nice. So this is the oscillators up here. They are wavetables, so it's going from one sort of part of it to the other. So as it plays, you can see it's moving along. Now, how I've got that to move along the wavetable is something called speed here. I've synced it, and I've synced it to 4 bars, so it slowly moves along that wavetable. There's also 2 oscillators going here. So people were asking about jungle bass. A lot of jungle bass is the sort of wobble pitched bass where they sort of phase and interact with each other. So you can do that. Back in the day, we used to do that by sort of playing two notes on a keyboard. You could have an 808 or anything like that, sub, and playing two notes on a keyboard, and you'd get that. Now the problem with that is you're slightly pitching it. So the best way I find to do this is with a synth, and you do the fine tuning. So if I just sort of play this on its own and pull it over to 1, it's just a plain, you know, it's kind of like a sine wave, which is morphing into almost a saw. I've got the cutoff on, so I'm just dealing with the lower frequencies. And what we're going to do is it's moving through the wavetable there. So the speed it moves through is this. And you can sync it or unsync it. And you can do the start point. It's really interesting wavetable synth this. There's not another synth like it. It's quite a simple synth, everything on the front, because of the fact you can do all these different things. I really like it. You can put the midpoint and change that, so change where it cycles. So if you concentrate mostly on the left hand one, on oscillator 1, and then you put on loop, so you can see I've told it to go from that start point over to that midpoint and then to loop with the end point. And you can also change the you can change the end point as well. Sorry, I'm really fidgety with Macs and mouses like this. I should set up a mouse. And so it's quite a versatile wavetable synth for moving through. So as I was saying with the fine tuning, I'm going to introduce the next one. So I'll put this back to how it was, so that they're two identical synths, basically, two identical oscillators. So you can see them moving like they are. So with the second one, when we add that in, I'm going to fine tune that against this one. Now this is the important thing. You fine tune one way and one the other, and then that way it keeps your note, when you play your note on the keyboard, in key, basically. So I'm going to pitch this one, let's say 30 cents. About the maximum I do this is about 50 either way. 50 either way is like hitting two notes on a keyboard, but doing it slightly less is better as well. So now when I introduce this one, I'll take off the unison. I'll turn up a bit of volume. If you haven't got speakers, you're going to need to listening to this on not on a laptop or phone, because you won't be hearing anything basically. So now you can hear them interacting and giving a little bit of rumble between each other, and that's the fine tuning that's doing that. So they're exactly the same tuning but slightly offset against each other. Unison will give you more. And it really, you can hear that wobble being added there. Now you can hit it in mono and have it in mono mode, or you can deal with it in other ways. So with the unison hit here, I quite like it. It gives it much more rumble, and I also like the fact that there's a little bit of stereo information in it. But with subs, you always want your main low frequencies in low. So what I've set up here is an EQ with a mid side, so that I can take off the side information of that sub. So if I take off this side EQ that I've got here, that one, there we go, we eventually get there. So this one is the one that I've put on side, and I've brought over high past it. So when I take it back there, you can, if you look at that stereo out, you can see it's just all over the place with stereo information, and that's not good in a sub frequency. So I've hit that onto mid and side mode and put a high pass filter, and you can choose your point you want the sort of stereo information to come in, and then if you look at that, you can see it's much more controlled now. Now there's also something else that's on here. Again, you're going to need really good speakers to hear this, not really like laptop sort of thing. This is a great thing with EQ. With jungle bass, back in the day, basically what they were doing was put in synths, quite often samplers, like just an Akai sampler with the sine waves out of it, or 808s and various samples loaded on a floppy disk into the Akai, out of there into a mixing desk. and the mixing desk will be used for a lot of the saturation. You could do things in Aquies and EMUs to clip things and what have you, but a lot of the saturation comes from the mixing desk. So there's a little feature I like on this EQ. So all I'm loading is an EQ. It can deal with my mid and side, and then I have got a analog section. I like the UK modern one here, and harmonic distortion, total harmonic distortion level. So I've put this ridiculously high, up at about 500%, and then I mix in the level to taste. So as you're mixing it in, you can hear and see the frequencies. If I pull up that so you can see it, you'll see the harmonics, the added harmonics change. So if I take it off, we go back to much less harmonics up here. And so on small speakers and what have you, you won't hear that bass hitting through. So hitting it with some harmonic distortion, like what's in this EQ, will give you those frequencies that punch through. There's various other ways of doing this. Another question which came from another guy in the group was about how to get mid bass on your 808s, mid-high bass. So this is one of the ways of adding harmonics. Basically, all music is harmonic layering. So when you're dealing with stuff, you're really just dealing with the harmonics of the sound and what you want to bring out in certain harmonics and what you want to tame in others, especially when it comes to the mix and mixing stuff together. So if you've got any questions so far, like, get them in the group. I don't know who we got in there. We got comments. I'm going to get Jack on the go, like having a little look and seeing if anyone's got any comments. If anyone wants to know anything, any questions on anything, get them in there and I'll see if I can cover them. I'm just doing some basic stuff here, but I can do other stuff as well, mixing, mastering, everything. So yeah, if you want to know anything, get it in. And so yeah, here's the little beat I made earlier. We'll take off that Apache for now. So the other thing that I've got going with this little Blue Peter job that I've done earlier is a layer of a lot fatter beat, which is backing up the Amen. So the Amen has had EQ taking off some of the lows, a little bit of brightness. I don't think I've got harmonic distortion on that. It's had an envelope. This is Oxford Evolution, one that I really like, and the reason why is because you can do frequency. So I'll turn that down a little. You can do frequency dependent work on it. So if I take the frequency right up, you're going to need to hear this. So I'll give it a little play so you can hear it, and then I'll explain what's going on. So as you can hear there, it's basically setting a cutoff for where you want the envelope to start cutting into the waveform. So you've got the various settings of the hold, attack, release, etc. But rather than just sort of being a sustain, attack, transient designer, it can do frequency dependent. And that's really handy. Cubase has one, which is the multi-band envelope, which is really nice, but this I find just has so much more control over it. Now there's another thing I went into here, which is like a refinement plugin, and I'll take that off and explain why I've done that and other ways of doing that. So with this break, I've gone into the HEQ. Louis was asking if this is my go-to EQ. This is my go-to EQ for certain things. I like Fab Filter as well, the Pro Q2s, 3s, etc. Really, really good filters. I find this one much more like doing more than one thing. Like I was saying, with this analog section here, it really gives you so much more in the EQ. I can have, you know, saturation in one plugin as well as my EQ. So you can really shape things with this and tonally change things. So it depends what I'm working on. If it's something like a bass or drums that I want to smash and I want to do more to, this is one of my go-to EQs 100%, because of, like I said, that feature with the analog harmonic distortion. On the beat, I'll show you. There's various types. My favourite, because it smashes it the most, is the UK Modern. But yeah, you can sort of hear what it does. I'll give it a little play. So you can hear, you know, how much like dirt and, you know, disgusting harmonic content that's adding, which is quite a good thing on certain things which you want. I don't want it at those levels on this though, so we'll take that back down again. So yeah, to answer Louis' question, go to EQ if I want multiple things happening. So with the amen break, something that's always, you know, you need to be mindful of is, well, especially when you're distorting it and bringing it up, is the harsh frequencies that you'll get in it. So there's various ways to deal with that. I'm going to show you one of the ways. This is to deal with, you know, it could be any sort of instrument, but drums are especially guilty for it. And that's real harshness in the sort of areas between, say, 2 and 4K. So there's a couple of plugins that can do this with the Waves one. There's the C6, there's the C4, and basically you're looking for anything that's got a dynamic section to it. Dynamic EQ, dynamic compressors can help with this as well. The F6 is a newer one as well that Waves have got. So what you can do, I'll set it up and I'll show you what I'm doing with it. So I've got the threshold working, and the more I dig that down, the more it's going to EQ that. So this is a really useful thing for breaks, for de-essing, for dealing with peaks after filtering. Lots of different things that this sort of effect or way of processing can be used. So with this one, with something like an amen, what I might do is play around, and apologies on if you can hear the bass coming through. We're testing downstairs for later tonight. And if you're in Thanet, come down for later tonight. We've got a vinyl special going on. I've dug out the decks. And yeah, I'm going to be having some fun with them. So I'm going to go into something where I'm going to have to be a bit careful with it. So these are quite fun things. Every now and again, these are on discount, and you can pick up these things for like $29 and stuff. Shout to anyone who's sort of attending today and in the thing. I should have some Waves vouchers for people who've joined the stream and who've come here today. We've not got many people here, but next time there might be. So these little things, various drums, they're all in ones, these things, mainly made for sort of more Indian rock and stuff like that. But they're really good fun for just getting something like an amen or a break and just trying to change it up and change the sound of it, because you can do it very quickly. But there's something you need to be careful of. Some of them are very, very loud. So what I'll do, I'm just going to switch these over so that the envelope is before it. I'm going to pull down the master and then sort of play them and pull the master back up. So there's various settings. If you go to the sort of presets, you can see there's loads of presets here. So fun thing to do, just pull through some presets. Like I said, pull the master down and then I'll pull that back up just to make sure I'm not redlining. So it's got various different things: attack, length, attitude, wood, presence, verb, sensitivity over here. You want to be hitting about yellow. Green is a little sort of, you know, not that hot. Red is too hot. Yellow's about right. You've got a gate on it, a compressor, lows and highs, so you can play with all these, and you can play with all these and really change the sound of your thing. Down the bottom is, you know, the process that it's meant for: kick in, kick out, snare top, snare bottom, toms. But you can just play around with these and see what sounds good. So if you flick through some of the presets, you'll just start to get lots of different sounds for your amen or your break. Some of them be higher than others, some of them be more pushed than others. And that sort of classic old Dillinger sound of... Sorry, like I said, you need to watch the master outs on these. You're getting real different feel and effects for your drum, you know, with the very quickly and doing things that keep it creative and inspirational, nice and quickly for you, and give you, you know, basically like a producer. All of these sort of producer-led things are extremely good producers that know what they're doing. So you're not going to get any settings in there that are like, you know, ridiculously wrong, as it were. They might be wrong for your material, but they would suit whatever would be needed. So you can kind of tell what they are, you know, snares, kicks, etc. I'd say have a playthrough. Real good fun. I played around with these and just recorded out like 4 different settings for the amen, then, you know, level them and then bring them in, and you've got 4 different sounding amens that you can smash through. So yeah, that's a really useful tool. And I'll show you a little bit more of the regroover, because this, you know, with jungle especially, how you cut up your breaks and how you do your breaks is essential, and it's the main part of it. Back in the day, I always think we've got the tools these days to do an awful lot, but we don't do it, or not everyone does. Back in the day, when I started, I remember going around my friend Dave's, and it would take you half a day to load a break into the sampler, cut it up, and have a break running. Now you've just got it in an instant. And back then there was limited sampling space as well, so in order for the track to be interesting, people needed to edit the track more, and more went on with the breaks, more went on with the tracks. And so I think it's really good that with the tools that we've got, producers try and go deep with them and try and, you know, show what these tools can do rather than just speeding up your workflow. And so for me, Regroove is something that's come out that's really, really good for this. I could do with a few extra things on it, but for now, this is good. I'm going to email them and ask for a few extra things. So I'll play you this break, and then I'll show you how I cut it up. And I'm going to take a little drink so I can clear my throat as well. Okay, so you can see we've got amen break here, and so what I need to do for this to work properly is take that out, because that's the sort of edited version that I've done once I've then sort of made a drum machine out of my amen break, which is in this part. So we'll go back to the layers, and to show you how to use this, I'll sort of do the drum. So we're going to put 6 layers. That's going to split up the amen into 6 layers, and we're going to say the activity's high, and so it'll really split it, and then we might look at it and do it differently. I'll show you what it does. So now you can see what's happened to that. It's split the amen over lots of different things. So we've got that section, which is kind of saying is the snare. We've got the kick. I'll tell you what I'm going to do as well. I'm going to take off oh, sorry, that's the MIDI track. Sorry, it was a bit too much smashing highs on that setting, so we'll take that off so it doesn't annoy my ears while I'm doing this. So back to the regroover. So as you can see, it's split it down into 6 layers, and it's spectral analysis this is. So it's really interesting way. And I mean, like, look at that layer. Yeah, it's the ride, but it's so much noise. And there's something I've found that with this, you can actually take out noise and make your brakes quite a bit cleaner and just get rid of some of the crap that was kind of there, to be fair. So that's clearly the transient sort of stem. So that's a bit mad having that many. So what I'm going to do is put it back to 4 layers and put it on medium activity and split it again. And now that's given me something which I think is a bit more handleable. So you've got the snare, sort of ride, kick, and the other ride. So 2 of these channels I think should be the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock that top channel. I'm going to lock that. So that's the kick and the snare locked. And what that means is they're not going to take any of these other channels and have the stuff put into them. So then I'm going to go over here to this little rubber, highlight it, click this channel and take all the way along, and then I'm going to split it. And so because this is locked and this is locked, it can't go into them, and so it's going to go into that channel. So once I've split it, we've now got nothing on this channel, so we can turn that one off, lock it. We'll unlock the kick channel and unlock the snare channel. Now you can see I've just got the rides there with kind of a bit of the transient and the kicks and the snares. And so looking at these, I'm going to say I want those transients to be part of the kick. I want those transients to be part of the snare. So we go back over, we're highlighted on that. So now I'm going to highlight those 2 parts. I'm going to keep this one locked. I'm going to highlight those 2 parts to tell it to go there. I'm going to highlight those 2 to tell it to go on that kick. Ooh. That looks like it should be that kick because that's a double amen kick, you can hear that. That one on there. That one on there. Now, the amen kick is better. So you see that rumble and hear that rumble afterwards. That's kind of just a lot of noise. So there's a little feature they have over here, which is a gate. And so you can just gate the kick and get rid of that noise. And you've got attack, hold, release settings on it. With this, you've also got EQ, compressor, and a saturator. So you can really get going on each of these levels to give it quite a little bit of processing, as it were. There's something also, this is the single output, the stereo output. There is another version of this that you load via an instrument, and it's multi-outputs, so you can set your outputs to different. So they're out over here, you can see the outs. So you can choose all your outs. So you can also put a plug-in. So as well as this, you can then have it on separate outputs on your DAW with plugins on each one, the kick, the snare, etc. So that's how I'd go through them. So if I just load the one I'd done before, as it were. So you can see what I've done. I've taken it down to 3 main layers. And I think that's the one that I saved just before I sorted the transients. So we'll try and load it. Oh, is that one? Okay. Yeah. So I've saved over the one I've done earlier. My Blue Peter job's gone, and I've gone over it with this one. So let's carry on, and I'll show you how to do it rather than Blue Peter in it. So again, with the transients, this one hasn't sorted the transients, so we'll click on them. Oh, I've got that locked. Get them over for the kick. Need to unlock that kick and split it, and then that's giving me my kick. So to build the editor, what I would then do, take it off this section here and then double click it, and it goes grey, and you can drag out what you want there, and then when you grab the bottom of it and hold it, you can then drag it over. Once you drag that over, you can then go into your editor and see it, and just make sure it's cut properly. And I like to give it just a tiny envelope just to smooth any pops and clicks that might be there. And then the next section would be the ride. And so you go over, and the same again. And so you can see how you can build a really, really intricate drum kit from slightly different versions of the, ways of cutting up the Amen. So one of the interesting things you can see here is the ghost snares. Bless you. And the rides are on separate channels. So if you want to use just parts, quite often people just cut up and use high pass bits of breaks, especially the Amen, high pass filters, etc. If you just want to pull out the shuffle, this is brilliant for that. So you can just, get rid of the kick and the snare channel and just have that channel. So I've loaded various breaks through this. I haven't added that long, but I've, loaded a few little things, had a little play with some of the stuff, some of the breaks that I've got. I've done the old hot pants there. A little bit harsh that going through that channel that the Amen was. Probably don't need that so much. And again, with this regroover, you can run it just as a loop in the mode that I was in showing you there. If you just draw in on, I think C4, I think it is, or C1, it'll just run the loop. But the editor is the nicer way of sort of running a break. And again, like I'm saying, if you just want certain elements of a break, you can see that's missing the transient from that one sort of thing. That's one of the things with this you've got to be a little mindful of is making sure the transients are with what they should be sort of thing. So lock them, that's the transient for that, that's the transient for that. Now the snares are a little bit up. So one of the things you can do with this is export layers mixed down, patterns mixed down. So you can export individual ones or the whole lot together. And so if you just want to pull out a little shuffle and have the hats, or you just want like, those two should probably go together to make up the hats. Or you just want to pull out each bit, it's brilliant. And you can also just pull out individual things, so like the Apache break, you can just highlight the cowbell, bring that out, take out hats and percussion out of breaks and just use them. So absolutely brilliant sort of tool. I think it's kind of I think the updates that come for it, there'll be more, and it'll be able to do more, but for me it's one of the best tools that I've had going for a little while. So I'm just going to shut this down and reopen it, so I'm back to my Blue Peter job that I sort of went over, and I'll have a little look and see if there's any questions from you. Paul was just asking, I was talking about quad core and dual core and stuff. So basically this laptop is old MacBook 12. I got it quite cheaply, and really I should have bought my tower down here to do this with, but this is more for mobile stuff and teaching. But it's really sort of running hard. As soon as you load a few things, load a few plugins, you run into a lot of problems with CPU. So off of this, I have got UAD on Firewire, so some of my plugins are running on that. At home, for my main machine, I've got the Wave Server 1. I was hoping to show you that today, but I had little issues getting it set up with my laptop in time. I left it all a bit late and was updating software at the last minute because everything needed updated for this laptop. So I'll hopefully show you that next time. I might actually bring a bigger machine next time, so I can do a little bit more and get a bit more interactive in sort of, you know, creating a tune and showing you the processes, as it were. But as we were saying, with dual core and quad core, this is a dual core Mac, meaning 2 processors in it. They do bigger ones with quad core, and that gives you double the power. I would highly advise anybody who's looking to upgrade their computer to not upgrade your computer to look at DSP for your plugins. I've spent years sort of going through quite a few computers and learned the hard way that the best way is to go for DSP. So my machine at home is I think it's 12 cores. It's got 64 gig of RAM in it, 12 cores. It is ridiculous, but it's a pure beast. But when I run Cubase, I've got the performance meter up here and you can see it flashing away. When I run Cubase, I will be spiking on my average load. It'll be absolutely high. I'll have my buffer at 2048. Got loads of plugins running, everything running. I do like to run big projects. I'm quite mad with that. So I need processing power, and I find I run out very, very quickly. And so with my big machine, Cubase can be maxing it out completely, but when I look at my processor, it's just sitting at 20%. So I don't know if it's a Windows thing, I don't know if it's a Cubase thing, but it actually can't really use all your processing power. I've seen a few things with updates saying that they can. I've used other software, I've tried other DAWs, all of them kind of max out before my computer is maxed out. However, if you load DSP with your plugins, it takes all of the power away from your processor to just allow it to run the DAW, and all your plugins are being run on another computer essentially. So you get much greater stability, much greater ability to run big projects, have as many plugins as you want, and not worry about bouncing down quite so quickly, basically. And that's a subject that's worth touching on, is the bouncing down, because it's one of the problems that I found coming onto the laptop to try and show you guys some stuff. Is literally, you know, my normal way of working is maxing out this machine completely. So if you look, I've got a default set up here. So I set up a default where I've got folders for my drums, my bass, my leads, my vocals, my pads and strings, and my SFX. I've got my inputs and outputs set up. Whatever setup I'm on, that will be set up. At home, I've got a Allen and Heath desk, so I'll have all my ins and outs set up so that I can go out to my desk from Cubase, analog EQ it, and come straight back in, and process as well. Group tracks I've got set up. So already just my default is quite a big project. It's quite a big, you know, thing, and that's one of the problems. I've had to strip it back for this. I think I've done a default video which I've not put out, but I will put it out. I need to edit it and put it out. It takes me about 45 minutes to set up my default. So this is why you want to set up defaults, so that every time you load your DAW, you're not just setting up the same stuff that you need every single session. So with this one, I've got a kick group set up. I've got a snare group, a percussion group, fills, which would be like bongos, toms, that sort of thing, which aren't quite the same as hats and rides, etc. Then a drums bush, which all of them then go into for sort of drum processing. I've got a bass group. Sometimes that'll be a subgroup and a tops group. Leads, vocals, pads, SFX. And then something very interesting which I want to touch upon is 2 master outs. Sometimes I have 3, which is another one to level going into analog gear. For any of you that know analog gear, there was a wonderful thing that happened in digital. They forgot to tell you that 0 dB in analog is actually -18 in digital. So where your output meter here reads 0 or just under with me, if you send this out to analog equipment, you're slamming it ridiculously. To send it out to analog equipment, you need to hit it to -18, and that's a vast difference in volume level. It's, you know, it's quite something. So I love to use analog gear. I find it gives you a fatness that you know, just isn't there in digital. I find with digital, especially with a mix, if you try and get a mix, you know, done with plugins, you can, but analog is giving you something that just, for me, just is missing in digital. There's a fatness, a warmth, a harmonic content, whatever you would call it. It's really there. So as I was saying, this is how I set up my DAW. I might have another one which will be a level out, and that's so that I can bring it right down and then go into analog equipment. So what I have set up here, if I show you, I'll pull it down and then show you how I get loudness, why I set this default up, and yeah, what uses it has. So I'll turn it down a little here so you can see what's going on. So if you look at what I've got going on, there's not a lot, but nothing is clipping. Right? None of the plugins are clipping. There's headroom and everything, and there's a reason for that. A lot of people just don't notice and pay attention in the digital domain to their clipping and their headlight, their levels and what have you. Now, if you're loading a distortion plugin and you're going into it at 0 dB, you're not hearing the distortion plugin, you're hearing clipping, because the output is just clipping. And so that is an effect in itself, a distortion effect of clipping. So you don't want to like have all your levels so hot that all your plugins are clipping, and you're not actually hearing the sound of your plugin, you're just hearing the sound of clipping. So for me, I like to work at reasonable levels, almost analog levels. Like if you can gain stage with analog education in mind, you know, look that up. There's a lot of stuff online about that. It puts you in a very good position for quite a tight mix that you can then bring up at a later stage. So as I was saying, I go into all my groups here, then I go into a pre-master. At the moment, I've got nothing on that. I would use a master bus setting, which I go into. I'll go over that another time when I've got a computer that can handle my master bus setting. And yeah, then after that it's post fader. So there's something that I've got set up on post fader. If you have a look, the Cubase, now Cubase 9.5, you can move this little green line. This little green line is for your inserts. Above it is pre, after it is post. So I'm going to use this fader as a volume control for my mix, but I don't want to clip the output. So what I'm doing is putting a smack attack in clip mode on the output post fader. So now what I can do, if you look at my post fader, I've now got level. So for doing my mix, none of the plugins are being clipped. All of the levels are good. And I would say, like, in drum and bass and dance music, people are wrong. Everyone is clipping stuff. Lots and lots of people, I'd say 99.5% of the mixes I get sent by pros and beginners alike all have their true peak over. Like, you shouldn't do this. You know, yeah, it's an aggressive music, but that can be done in the mix. An amplifier is for turning it up. That's what it's made for, and that's what it's designed for, and it has an electrical circuit for. So your music sounds a lot better if you really think about your levels. And if you like a push clip sound, that's fine, but that doesn't mean you need to push or clip your master or your buses. So now what I'm going to do is clip my master and go against everything I said and show you how to get it loud. So the reason this works slightly better than just clipping it all away is because in every stage of this gaining so far, there is no clipping, no plugins over, none of that happening. Now, with this master output, I can have volume. And in Cubase, if you go into your setup, project setup, you should be able to get 12 decibels of volume on your fader. If you can't go to 12, it's set to 6 in project setup. So put it on 12, and you have an extra 12 decibels here. So that's the sort of mix I would send for mastering. I'd have headroom in it. When I want a mix that's loud that I'm going to send out for DJing, I turn that up. If you look at my output, I'm not clipping. So I can have 12 decibels of gain without clipping my output. Now my true peak will be over, because when you push it that much, your true peak's over, and that's what oversampling is for. So plugins that have oversampling can help you out when you're pushing your true peak over. So have a look into them. Very, very useful. So as you can see, with that, I just have loudness under one thing. I'm not having to deal or fight with plugins, fight with levels, fight with anything beforehand. I just get a good mix and then deal with loudness with one simple factor afterwards. And the difference that will make to your mix is quite astronomical compared to smashing plugins left, right and centre throughout the thing. I'm just going to check Matt, big up Matt Newmer. How would he build drums without using breaks? What layers you use? Snares, ghosts, kick snares. So we'll go into the layer that I have here for that, where I've blue peated it and done it before. So this just a little free, I think it was free with computer music beat machine. So it's literally just got kicks and snares loaded in it, and hi-hats, etc. So one of the things I did with Serial Killers, when I started Serial Killers, I'd already sort of just about made a name as a solo artist with Vital Elements, making, you know, more sort of standard drum and bass, not so much jungle, and it has a more simple two-step pattern with its beats, kick, snare, hats, percussion, etc. You know, yeah, you use breaks, but that was always there. And then with Serial Killers, I sort of took that sort of fat modern drum that everyone had and mixed it with like the jungle to try and bring the jungle up to date so that you could mix the records together and it doesn't, you know, drop down by 10-20 dB. So the way of doing that is this sort of layer that I've got here, and whether it's breaks or not, quite often I do have layers underneath. Some breaks you can use just with one break, work on it, EQ it, get it sounding nice, and you can get away with a break. But with, you know, most drum and bass, it's very processed beats, very processed electronic drums, kicks and snares with breaks in there for the shuffles and the fills and stuff. So this is the sort of thing I do. I had the Amen pattern. That's what I started off with, and so I just copied the pattern basically of the kick and the snare. Now, if I wanted to carry this one on and not have an Amen, I would go through and get the hats. So I like drum machines. Anything that you can process and make drums in quickly is good. I recently bought a Korg Vocla or something drum synth. Mad little thing, and I've used it in tunes already. Another thing which is really nice, my friend Dave gave to me, is Machine. I've got the software and he gave me his hardware as well, and it's a controller that you can just make beats on in an instant and drag and drop them off, and you've got something there. So when it comes to beats, I like drum machines, I like Reason, I like Machine, I like anything that you can do stuff creatively and quickly with. There's lots out there, so whatever you find is good, then I'd say use. The other thing I'd say with it is the more, with this one you can't, this is quite a simple free thing, but the more you can add your own samples, the better, because then you can process your drums, make your drums, and then start adding them to your equipment and to your processors, and then you start a collection of your own beats basically. So with simple drum processing, I would advise, if you're a complete beginner, I would advise you simply sit there with like a one bar loop, and you literally sit there and just play around with all the different patterns so that you get to know the steps and the patterns and where you need to. The kicks are always, with house it's always on the one. With drum and bass it's a bit different, so there's several drum and bass sort of standard patterns. Just have a play about, they're quite easy to find. Another way of doing it is to open up an audio file, load it in there and look at where they're positioned. So if you've got a beat you like, dissect it. Like, use your records or your tunes as books and dissect them. Zoom into them, see exactly where they're programming, where they're hitting it, and you'll learn a lot from that. So with programming beats, I would do kicks and snares like I have here, quite possibly layering them. I always layer stuff. And so the first thing would just be getting a groove, would just be getting the sort of pattern that you want to go with. And so that would be kick, snare, hat, always bearing in mind, depending on what you're doing, but always bearing in mind, like, drummer only has a pair of hands and a pair of feet. You don't want to go like completely mad with your layers, making it very unnatural. Not to say that it doesn't sound good sometimes, but our subconscious has got like a certain expectation when it comes to things. So it's good to keep to those rules to a certain extent. So if I was doing a beat, I would start off with something like that, and then I would play around with it and see, what I like, flick through, see if I prefer any of the other kits. And then from there, once I'm sort of happy with something, I would separate all of those parts. We're just doing like a sort of quick Q&A masterclass. I don't think I'll go into those levels of it because it takes a lot longer when you start cutting up and doing all those things. But I'll talk you through what I would do, and that would be to take each individual layer. Once you've got your groove, you've got what you're happy with, take each individual layer, the kick, the snare, the hats, the percussion, the rides, whatever, bongos, whatever it is that's made your drum, and export them and have them as separates on separate channels. You'd be surprised the amount of bleed and noise and bits and pieces you can end up in some bits of kit, depending on what you're using. There's other things like your contact drum machines and the various other drum machines that are out there where you've got whole drum kits, and they've recorded those kits, and so the spill is there, and overheads are there, and everything's there. So you want to be able to like process your drums as individually as possible and take off EQ, like rumble out of the low end of the hats, and maybe a little bottom off the snare, and various things, again, resonant peaks in drums. Regroove is excellent for cutting things up and really being able to go in there, and it's got the EQ sections and stuff. But say, for example, on this drum, you can see a couple of little peaks. They're not too bad, but it's the sort of thing when you're doing drums, if you take them down onto all their separates, you can then really go into each individual. You can see any harsh peaks. You can, like take out the harshness of the peaks. You can take off the rumble of the low on, like I was saying, on your hats, your rides. You can shape them, transient shapers, envelope shapers. And especially, shapers and stuff and compressors, when you're doing it on a loop, it's sort of coming back. A loop is very interactive, it's very real with up and down layers, and so compressors sometimes don't recover in time for the next hit and stuff. So when you're dealing with individuals, you really start to be able to get that individual sound how you want. So I'd say you dissect the beat, take it down like that one I would dissect. I'd take down to 4 channels. I'd clean them. I'd make sure the transient were punchy and everything. I'd make sure the frequencies were hitting. I'd probably put them through processing as well, and you could even do that beforehand as well. You know, you want in drum and bass, you want your drums to be fat. So, you know, as you're, you know, coming through a sound. So this one's like, you know, quite plain kit. So I'll show you a few bits of processing I might do before I split it. Got the amen and everything still there. So we'll just get the drum. Have that line, a bit woody sounding. So the first thing, usually the first thing that I do is EQ. And I, like I was saying, I like the HEQ. Just look at the lows. You've got various settings on this one where you can see the curves of the EQ just changing. So just take off a little bit of rumble. Might want to take off a little bit of the tops, depends on the break. I'll just play around with those curves again. See which one I want. Maybe a little bit sharper than that, to be fair. Now, with this, you've again got the saturation, if you want to. I always like to saturate drums. You can hear it breaking up there. A good thing to do with saturation, is take it to the breakup point and then bring it back a bit where you can't hear it breaking up. And the difference that gives is nice. It'll add a lot of harmonics and give you subtle differences which don't sound distorted. So that's it without. That's it with, almost just like a volume gain, but there is, because it's, you know, a harmonic distortion, it is adding harmonics, which is frequencies in the spectrum higher up, which will give you more fatness basically. So first thing would be EQ, little bit of saturation out of that EQ because it's just, you know, it's doing its job there as being a multi-unit, as it were. So again, always keep an eye on your levels as you're upping things, bring them back down. With drums, compression goes without saying. Compression is, you know, a lot of people misuse it, don't understand it, but it's a really essential tool with audio. The main thing you're fighting as sort of a mixer, producer, masterer, is peaks and controlling peaks. And everyone wants their music loud. So, you know, you can have a track that's peaking at 0 dB, and it's hitting a certain sound pressure level, let's say, and then you can have a track that's peaking at -1, but the fatness in that is just ridiculous, and it's because its peaks are under control, and through the recording process you need to be aware of it if you're recording, and through the mixing and making process you need to be aware of it. So it's always good to, along the way, have a little bit of various things, be it compression, saturation, limiting, going on, so that you're getting a few dB at least on most of your main things, of just a bit of tightening, bit of bringing down, which you can then bring up and, you know, increase the overall perceived level. So it is an essential tool, but it's easy to like misuse it and mash it up. So I'll show you some of my favourite settings with this one for a drum bus. This is a dedicated drum bus compressor, or a bus compressor, should I say. So with it, I've got my release I put on auto. It's a lovely sort of SSL unit. It's very good at reacting and understanding reaction. The attack, I want to accentuate with my drums. I want to accentuate the attack of the transient. I don't want to, you know, put my drums into a something that's going to take away the power and the punch. So for years I've always used compression on drums to add punch. It's a trick that, you know, I learned many years ago from a mastering engineer, and I've used it ever since. And with this, I would say an attack of 10 to 30 is needed, probably 30. 10 you could get away with, but I'd go with 30 and just let them through and get that real nice punch. So with the threshold, you can pull the threshold down so it's working, and then the makeup gain to match what is being sort of compressed, as it were. So if I take the makeup gain down, you can see that compressing actually makes it quieter. So the more you compress, the quieter it gets, which is why you've got your makeup gain, because then you can bring the overall level back up. So what that's basically doing is giving you, I'm trying to get in the camera there, it's basically giving you a peak like that, and then it's taking it down, but it's also taking the small quiet levels and it's bringing them up. And so overall you get a lot more pressure and power. And this one doesn't have it, but some compressors have a mix thing, so you can parallel them or you can put them on a send. This amount of compression is nice when you parallel it in on a dry wet, but with this on the drum bus, we're going to come way back so that it's just eating into a few dBs, and we're just having a slight little bit of work. Jack's just asking, I should explain what I mean by parallel. So if I load another compressor, I will show you that. That's the H comp. I don't want the mono. Give me the stereo, please. So with this one, this has a mix dry signal, mix and wet signal. So if it's dry, nothing's happening, it's just going through the compressor. As I mix that in, it's mixing the wet signal with the dry, and that's known as parallel. You can do it with various things. You can do it with distortion, you can do it with reverb, you can do it with, you know, almost anything really. Creativity's like down to your brain, as it were. And another way that kind of does that is if you're using it on a send. So you can mix in the send of the distortion or the compression.
Kind of just essentially the same as you putting it on a send.
Yeah, kind of. It like on reverbs and stuff, you will notice slight difference having it on an insert on some, but technically, yeah, it's mixing it in with it. So you could do it via the send or via the mix level. So with this H compressor, this has got this is a really nice compressor that I'd want to show you actually. With a lot of things that have these analog features, turn them off. What they tend to be just a little bit of noise. It's, you know, analog desk emulation, as it were. So it's giving you just a little bit of noise, or 50 hertz hum, or you know that. So if you have 10 of these like going on lots and lots of different things, you will end up with lots of noise building up in your mix all the way. So take those off. So here we've got punch, attack, threshold, release, mix wet, output, and that analog section. So as we up the ratio and play with the threshold, you can see it working a lot more. And with the mix level, so that's 100% compression, you can hear you start to, you know, really compress it and smash it up. Now with the punch is essentially more attack. It essentially lets a certain amount of milliseconds through before the compressor works, so it gives you that punch in the beats again. So I always like this. This is one of my favourite compressors. Two reasons: one, the punch, which is, you know, really thought about the attack times and giving you even more, and two, the release. You can set it to the BPM of the host. I have always set small micro delays as ratios of the BPM. In house music, you use compression, sidechain compression to pump a lot. It's got to be in time with the music and working with the music. So it's really nice to have the BPM feature on here, and you can have the releases an 8th, a quarter, a 16th. So depending on how hectic your beat is, you know where the release is. With this, it's got something going quite frequently. So I'd put it at like 32 or 16 so that each little hit it's recovering in time for. And then back to the parallel. So I can smash that compressor quite hard, like 10, 12 gain reduction. But as I parallel it back in, you can see it's only working half the amount or less. And that's one of the nicest ways to use compression is parallel. So you're not smashing the whole signal, you're smashing it a bit and then adding in some more. You get things very, very clear and working that way. And so back to the drum bus. So it would be a compressor after the EQ. I'm going to go back to the SSL because that's designed for sort of drum buses and I like it on drums. There's a certain sound to it. It has almost a little bit, you've got to watch it on your mix, it has almost like a slightly centered sound. So you can lose a little bit of stereo spread. But there's a little trick I learned off of watching like one of the Waves videos. Can't quite recall who it was, one of the producers. If you put after the SSL, if you put the CLA 3A, no 2A, sorry. This is quite a wide sounding sort of unit, not even being used as well. So I pull it on, I pull off the peak reduction and pull down the gain because the gain's quite a bit louder. I find about 33 is about the same. Yeah. So that one's not even being used. Now, if you've got good speakers, you'd hear the difference with this, or good ears. But it's subtle things on the stereo width. Maybe headphones would help you with these. So I also like running things through emulations where nothing's being done, nothing's being used. All right, chaps. Nothing's being done, nothing's being used. It's just literally running through the gear because companies like Waves and the various others that have done this have modelled this gear to the extent where when you run it through it, if there was some harmonic distortion being added by the unit, it will be being added by the plugin. So there's a few bits that I use just running them through, and they're ever so subtle. You really need a good ear to hear it, but it does make a difference. Good headphones will show you. So those compressors, that one's working. That one's not working. It's just running through. And then I've also got the smack attack on here, and that was transient boosting, so you can hear it off. Lots less punch to the snare and the kick and what have you. And this has got a few settings. You've got sensitivity. If you look at the top line of the transient, you can just see how much you're affecting. So as you bring it down, it's affecting more of the body of the snare, sort of, and giving you more attack. And then as you go up, you're just getting those sort of higher frequency attacks, to be fair, the spiky ones. So you can set that how you want it. The sustain can be the same, the sensitivity, how much you want to go into that. And you've got some times on these as well, milliseconds and different curves that you can use for the shapes of the sustains and the envelopes. And one of the best things, you've seen this, me using it on the master out as just like a clipper. You want to be able to smash drums, so it's nice to have a clipper where you can just go into it and you can smash it and it's not going to take your output. So if I get the input here and just keep going, it's a clipper, so effectively it's cutting off everything at 0 dB. And you will introduce artifacts, but with clipping you can get, depending on how fat your sound source is and how processed it is in the first place, I've found you can get between 4 and 6 dB of unaudible volume gain by clipping. So where I was showing you like my master out, you know, that I can push that 12 dB without it distorting, as long as I'm going into it at a good level. I can have that much sort of room to go. But as you go into it, more and more artifacts will be being created by the clipping. I could cover that. It goes into, I think we talked about it one night around yours. It goes into your sample rate and the bit rate. So what happens when you're, this is with plugins as well, it's worth mentioning. It took me years to work this out, but I've sussed it out a few years ago and it makes sense to me. So I'll try and explain it to you. It's aliasing. So when you try and recreate frequencies past a certain point of the frequency rate that you're working at, you're then asking it to make digital calculations for something that is harmonics. And harmonics isn't digital, it isn't zeros and ones. Harmonics is like golden ratio stuff. So the computer is always going to struggle to try and create that. So an example would be, and this is why you hear this sort of aliasing distortion. You can hear it most on vocals and you know, instruments and stuff like that. But as I push this into there, you just start to hear it breaking. Now that's the sound. It sounds distorted, but that's clipping distortion. You've got tube distortion, you know, transient solid state distortion type stuff. That's clipping distortion. And what that is doing, it's noisy distortion. Some people, you know, talk about distortion being warm and fat and nice. That is just pure noise. And like I said, the reason being is because of your sample rate. So to explain it simply, if you're at 44.1 kilohertz, you can reproduce half of that 22 kilohertz when your level's going up to it. So if you're 16 bits, 44, you'll smash it up to that level. Then when you're going past that, you're adding harmonic information, harmonic distortion. So what that's doing is adding those frequencies higher up in the section, in the frequency range. And because you're sending a whole mix into it or a whole bus into it, those frequencies, you've got like 20 or let's say 50 hertz to 20 kilohertz in your drum there going. So all those high frequencies are having multiples of themselves being created. So like, you know, your first harmonic of like say you've got an E, your first harmonic will be the E above it, an octave above. The second harmonic will be an octave and a fifth above it. So let's say, and an octave is a doubling of the frequency. So let's say your 18 kilohertz hi-hat is just being smashed into clipping. That's now creating its harmonic distortion at 36 kilohertz. And you can only recreate to 22 kilohertz in a 44.1 setup. If you've got 96, you can recreate to 40, well, half of 96. So anyway, that basically allows you to recreate stuff. So that's why this setup where I don't clip any of the plugins or anything is essential, because you're not adding aliasing. The amount of tunes I get sent where the vocal or the musical sample come in and it's broken. I mean, people probably don't notice it, but it's, you know, and just think it's there on purpose. It's a bit distortion, but it's not. It's aliasing and it's breaking up, and all those frequencies that were broke up have been folded back down in digital, pushed back into the spectrum unharmonically, because it can't create the mathematics. But if you're running at 96k, you've got that much more headroom for that to happen. So that's why you've got to be careful with clipping and careful with running masters through clipping, because there's so many frequencies you're dealing with. You're getting so much stuff created and then folded back down. You're just getting aliasing, really. And that's quite a sound these days. A lot of people use clipping as part of it. On a kick drum, on a snare, you won't hear the aliasing or anything because it's so fast.
Does that go back to your analog digital as well, where you're sampling from an old to a new and try to get that
Well, at the analog digital, you need to look into AD conversion and DA conversion as well when you're doing that. So that's a whole other field. So if you're going out to analog and back in, you need to. That's what AD DA converters do. Yeah, that's what I do recently. I've got loads of analog gear and I'm using it a lot to get like the sound that I want, the fatness, the warmth, you know, the niceness of the tops on the EQs on there and everything, and then into the digital domain to sort of, you know, boost it up as it were. But as I was saying, AD DA conversion is what's needed when you're going out because of the number crunching, because every time it needs to send it out into an analog signal and then back into a digital. So much digital to analog's not such a problem. The analog to digital is more number crunching, and that's where a good converter is going to come in. And if you've got good converters, you can go in and out all day long and have great fun doing it. If you haven't, every time you do that, your sound quality will be destroyed, and you know you will notice it. So yeah, it's another thing to look into is that AD conversion when you want to like mix analog. I've got a desk. I've got a mixing desk that does it. I'd highly recommend it for anyone who wants to do analog digital on a budget that isn't going to go and like buy a 50 grand Neve, you know what I mean? It's not going anymore, but you can still get them second hand and new if they're still in stock. It's the Allen and Heath ZR16, and so it's like a Firewire thing. So I basically in my outputs here, like where you see your groups, I can go to my groups that I have set up or my desk. And so I'll have a kick drum and I'll just go, right, I want it out to my desk, and then I've got a tube insert, bang, bang, and it goes back in. And each channel has got its AD conversion, and it's just all being done. I've been looking at that because it's an old desk, it's on Firewire. I've been having a few sort of latency problems and issues with it running when you get a big project. So I've been looking at how I can do this and replace it, and it's a lot more expensive. Like the simplest setup is like thousands to be able to do what I want to do with analog and digital. But I have to say, I mean, you can do everything on a laptop, but I started 20 years ago and I used all that gear. I had Akai's, I've still got them, so I like to use it. I don't want to sell the stuff. Yeah, and I've got old gear where you look on eBay and it's worth like 50 quid. I ain't going to sell that for 50 quid. I can make beats on that thing. There's no way it's leaving. So I keep them, and now I've got a studio where I have got it all in. Yeah, that's it, all of it. Yeah, it's nice stuff, and it has got a sound, you know. Yeah, it's not as pristine, but there's a warmth to it and a vibe to it. And I'd say that even with vinyl, like tonight we've got the vinyl night going on. All this sort of digital stuff and people making tunes on laptops and what have you, and all this aliasing and distortion, it's smashing everyone's ears. Like, you walk into a club, and I can't go to a club without earplugs on. I just can't, because like I will just ruin my ears and I can't mix for the next week. Like in the studio, so I have to wear earplugs all the time. But when you go to a night with vinyl, like when they were cutting, they would roll off at about 16 kilohertz, and so there was just nothing. It just silky smooth, you know, tops out of loads of different bits of gear that it's going through being mastered, and then nothing after that. Now we've got aliased files that are MP3s, 192s being played through. They sound awful. They sound horrible. They hurt your ears. It's nauseating. You can't listen as long as you used to. Like, you know, I'm putting it out there. You're all doing it wrong. Quite simply, it's being done wrong, and we really need to look at it as a scene, and as like dance music is guilty. Drum and bass is one of the worst, but other forms of dance music are as bad. Like I said, if you can get your mix so that it's loud but your true peak isn't clipped and you've got headroom, and so when it's converted to Spotify, to YouTube, to all these things which don't play it loud, by the way, they bring your tune down. If you can get your mix sounding good with a true peak that isn't over, then we're going to see who can mix and who knows what they're doing. You're just smashing everything. Yeah, it sounds all right on the lappy and all that, but you're making people deaf. Like, out in clubs these days, I seriously think some of the frequencies that are smashing in the digital domain are harming us, and it's not as pleasurable to listen to as the days of analog. And like for me, for one, I'm guilty of making loud tunes and using systems like this to smash it, but I'm very careful with how I do it. I don't want to introduce aliasing before I get to the point of loudness. If I've got all my plugins clipped before I get to that point, the distortion that I'm introducing to the mix when I'm doing that is just ridiculous, and you will notice it very much so on a loud system. And there's another thing that you can notice with limiting and loudness and what have you. Like I said, the nauseatingness. If you're a producer, do one of your mixes with headroom, do one of them smashed as you normally do, then go and listen to it on your system and see how much louder you can actually listen to the unsmashed mix, because it doesn't hurt your ears. And you start to get this fatness that's not there before your ears are hurt on the other one. And yeah, for me, it's something that's very important. I've nearly done a couple of videos on it before where I've just gone off on one and was going to moan and tell everyone they're wrong. But it is an area where I think, you know, we need to look at. There was the loudness wars in the 90s with rock and with everything. And I think with drum and bass, we've been suffering from that the last load of years. And all of the sort of top guys, the real pro guys, who, you know, signed to commercial labels, your Chasing Statuses, your Sub Focuses, none of them are smashed to the levels that the rest of the scene is. And there's a reason, because they're professional, and it's professionals that are finishing their stuff. And it pays, because when you listen to that on a loud system against a smash thing, your ears like it and it sounds good. And the only way you're going to tell that is by A and Bing and starting to do it. So anyway, enough of all that. I've had a moan at the scene for being too loud. And we've got half hour to go, so I'm going to go. We've got a few more people in the room now as well, so I'm going to go to the room and see if anyone's got any questions in production I can cover. Oh, okay, cool. The new McCrew boys were asking about beat processing. So as I was saying, after that, we're talking about controlling levels. I may use a limiter. I've got a clipper after this, but like I was saying, where you want to deal with your peaks and get everything sounding right, a really good thing to use is limiters carefully. So I think I'll use the L316 for this. Now this is a linear phase limiter, so it's going to add, probably ram up my processing and make it crash. It's going to add latency, so you don't run these real time, only run them, then bounce them, then pull them back in. Stuff that's linear phase, you've got EQs and various limiters and stuff that's linear phase. It's really good to use, really interesting to use, because it doesn't add the artifacts that normal limiting and EQing does. So when you're doing stuff on like whole mixes, linear EQs and limiters are definitely and compressors are definitely the ones to pull out. I kind of like to use them on master bus stuff as well, because they're so clinical and nice, and then just bounce it and deal with the latency and like chop it back, because you do get latency from them. So this is one of my favourite ones, so keep a little bit of out sealing. Now one of the key things with this is your priorities. So you can sort of smash it down into it, so you can see it to work, and as it's going you can see like the low mids are sort of the one that's really pulling them out first. So if you want to get them out of the way, I mean that might be what you want, but you can use this priority to say, no, I don't want to smash that quite so hard. So on mastering, for me, it's always the bass. I pull up the priority of the bass level. I need to turn these on as well, it helps. And then that basically tells the limiter not, you know, to leave that section alone. Because when you're limiting and compressing, always the loudest thing is the one that's going to hit it first. And in this is just a beat, so clearly the kick and the snare are what's hitting this limiter first. So if I take the priority off, you can see that it's acting a little bit harder into it and taking more down. And then as you add the priority up, those frequencies aren't quite being hit so much. And so it's interesting to do it with your tops as well, because you don't want to smash your tops sometimes. And it just gives you more sort of level without having all of the peaks reacting to the limiter. So the priority is an excellent little feature on a master. Without this on a master, I wouldn't use it. Basically, this is why it is my go-to limiter for things, because when you're limiting on a master, the bass is always the loudest. Kick drums and bass are always smashing, and so you don't want them to be hitting and making your compressor work when really it was your mid-range that needed the compression. So really nice. Multi-band compression is also good for that, but this limiting with priority is just a brilliant tool, absolutely brilliant tool. And you can also, you know, gain, so you can a little bit of EQ. I wouldn't advise too much. Again, you know, you want to do it before you get to these things. So with that, I just get my level to make sure that I'm hitting right and smashing, not too much, not aliasing, but I've pumped up the beat nicely. So you take it off and then put it on, you can hear what's going on. So that's the sort of process and I'd maybe do just to give, like, you know, bit of presence, get everything up there before then cutting everything up individually and laying it out individually as kick, snare, hat, percussion, as individual audio channels. I would deal with, like, once I've done that, and then you can process them, like I said, separately. And yeah, it's sort of much more control as well when you come to editing the breaks. You know, if you want to do kick rolls, snare rolls and stuff, they're on separate channels and you can deal with them. Again, I would probably, once that was done, then maybe bounce it down again. But it depends, you know, the levels you're going to. Another thing I'd talk about quickly with beats, because this is just one little break that's been pumped up, would be layering and beat layering. It's something that's, you know, done quite a lot in drum and bass. I used to do it an awful lot back in the day, and it can lead you into a lot of trouble sometimes if you're not careful. But it also helps you get really fat, you know, stuff. So when it comes to layering, the key things is phase and tuning, really, to making sure that things are in pitch harmonically and in phase, so that they're not cancelling each other out. If you go and layer two kick drums together, if they've got similar frequency contents, you can have a big problem with them fighting with each other. If you understand phase cancellation, that's good. If not, go look it up. I won't go through the length of explaining it, but you can basically either amplify your sound by double, by having it in phase, or disappear your sound by having it out of phase. If that's a pure sine wave, that would be. That's a little sort of, you know, audio trick you can do, as it were. Have them out of phase, play two signals, and there's nothing playing. So that's something you come into a big problem with layering snares, layering kicks, layering anything basically, is phase relationship. There's various plugins that you can use to align phase and what have you, and there's a few techniques as well which you can use. So if, for example, we duplicate this track and then I'll put a different beat on this one. And if I just take the snare maybe off of this one, and so we're just layering the snare, I'll show you an example of a couple of ways you can sort of check phase, as it were. Sometimes, like in audio, it's really useful. Obviously, if you're making drums in MIDI, you kind of got to do this to ear. In audio, you can align them and look. I'll probably have to take off that linear phase thing on the whatchamacallit, because it's starting to make my computer smash out, basically. So if I just solo the two snares together, sorry, I'm a little bit long in controlling stuff here, because I normally work on my big PC and not like a laptop. So them two I've got going into the drum channel, smashing it ridiculously, so we'll bring them down. So an interesting way of doing this, obviously you can you know, like have a scope type of thing, so you can look at the waveforms together, but that you can't really zoom into that much and see that well. There's various other scopes, like Cubase has got one you can zoom into, but one trick that I find quite useful, because what you're basically doing with phase is looking to get your, you know, you want it as loud. If you've got two things together, you don't want them cancelling, so you want them loud as possible. So one of the things you can do is, if you look at the peak output of there, you can see it's 2.5. Now if I go and nudge these snares about and keep a very close eye, it's hard without two screens really doing this. I'm used to two screens at home, but if you were to then go and get the snare and just move it ever so slightly, so take that off. I'll do a zoom in so you can see. I'm talking minuscule amounts. This is what we're talking with phase. You can play around and move them around until, this is why two screens is really essential with this, because doing this with one screen is a little long. So that was at like 2.4, I think it is 2.5. So if you nudge it along, either way, keep an eye on your peak level. And what you'll find is certain alignments will have a low peak level because there's phase cancellation happening. And then as you nudge it, your peak level goes up because it's not phase cancelling. And it's a really good way of sort of doing it and training your ear, because it's key for your ear to hear these things. They're really subtle, but they make a big difference on the mix. And so if when you're doing this, rather than doing it in audio and visually looking at waveforms, aligning waveforms, when you're doing it like this and you're just nudging it and you're looking for the little peak, you can hear it snap when you do it. I often do this in audio because it's got better nudges and stuff. But as you move them over, and what you're looking for is just a few dB. If you can just nudge your snare slightly and get another dB or two, you're going to hear it. You're going to hear it snap. You're going to hear it come and have that little bit more punch. And like I said, without using phase software, without using audio visuals, you'll also be training your ear into what an in-phase layer sounds like, and how just the tightness and the snap that comes when they work properly. And another way of doing it is pitching them. That's why I quite like Reason, because you can just pitch things so quickly up and down the keyboard, and every time you're doing that, that's changing the phase of the thing. And so you find that when you're layering, just changing the pitch, you'll lock, as you're doing the layers, you'll get breaks that will lock at certain pitches, and then at other pitches they don't sound very good layered. But the ability to move your layers quickly and easily is great. So Redrum is a really good one. Rex Player is a really good one. In Cubase I use things like Battery as well, and you can flick through the samples. Anything you can flick through, change pitches, change envelopes. You know, there's lots of different products out there that do it, but the easier it is for you to flip through, the better and quicker you'll get a beat running. For years I used Reason making drums, and then I always used audio. I get everything in audio afterwards, and a lot more processing would happen in audio. And I stopped using Reason for a little while, and it was really noticeable. I started to struggle making drums. And I was thinking, well, what am I doing? And I realised, you know, it was Reason. It was just the ability to be able to pitch things quickly. Because if you're just in audio making drums, I mean, if you've got Fruity Loops, I've seen Upgrade with Fruity Loops, and the audio manipulator can pitch, stretch, do lots of different things, you know, instantly. That is amazing with layering, because you can just see straight away, doesn't fit, fits, doesn't, and then go to your next sample straight away. And it's always worth checking the pitch of things when layering as well. So phase and pitch are a key sort of parts to get right. And the other thing with layering is smashing things together. Sometimes doing two sounds together, they don't sound very glued. One of the best ways, like if it's all, you know, phased and correct, it should sound all right, but sometimes you can still tell it's two sounds. So smashing together the sounds so that they go into the same group, which these two are, and doing a process like this will give them glue. Sorry, I'm going a bit far away from the mic then. It will give them glue, putting them together. Saturation and distortion is, again, another great one. I'm going to show you a plugin that I use for beats and for this because of many reasons. So this is the Shep's, I think it's a preamp channel emulator, Shep 73. One of the features on this is the drive. If you have a look at the output here, you can see my peak. Now, I'm always talking about peaks and how you want to control them and get as much out of them as possible, especially with drums, so you can get your loudness. Now, this is quite a distortion, but if you watch what this does. So if I take it off, you can see there we've got 4.3 is the peak. Putting the drive on, not only are you getting a louder, fatter sound because you're driving it, you've also cut off 4 dB of headroom. You've given yourself 4 dB of headroom on the peaks. So this is a plugin that I absolutely love on kicks, snares, drums. It does smash them, so you've got to be careful. If your sound's quite smashed in the first place, it might not sound that good when you put it through it. But if you're doing breaks from start and they're nice and clean, this will give you much more fatness, much more harmonic distortion, and sort out your levels. So you can do things like controlling peaks of 4 decibels plus, you know, making it louder and fatter. And it's a really useful tool for controlling, like if you watch how much that's being smashed, but the peak output is just not really doing that much. It's really leveling it off, and that's something that saturation and tubes and distortion does. It acts like a compressor, and it gets your transients, and it squashes them, and it makes them, you know, more rounded and nicer and easier to deal with. And that's how you get a lot of loudness into your mix. If each sound has had its transient slightly dealt with, even just by a few dB, your whole mix is going to be a few dB louder without your problems, without running into any of the equipment, smashing it, clipping it, etc. Because, you know, like I said, with drum and bass, you can be loud, but you don't have to clip. If you treat everything individually and on your groups, and you make sure everything's working, like we kind of did back in the day with an analog desk, you'd be ramping it, so you're basically squaring off your waveforms and giving them more control. You will get that loudness that you need, and you're not having to do it on your master. And so I think I'll show you another few plugins before I go. There's not long left because we're going to need to get ready for tonight and go and have some food as well. So thanks to everyone who's come here. We've got a few people in here, and thanks to everyone who's been logged on, and big up everyone who's going to watch this after it's been shared. So I was asked a couple of things about bass. Like I said earlier, all music is harmonic layering. So when it comes to like making sounds, you want to be dealing with the harmonics. So I went through HEQ earlier with its analog modeling on here, adding harmonic distortion, which you can hear that. Other ways of doing that is, you know, we take off that one, so you're not having that distortion anymore. We've just got the sub. This is another interesting one, Saphira. This is basically a harmonics generator. So the way it works is, if I turn it to harmonics display, so down the bottom here you've got harmonic 1, 2, 3. Like F is the fundamental, then harmonic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., going up the scale. The blue edge harmonics are the even, and the odd are the warmth. So you can see like first harmonic, second harmonic, etc. So as you put your track through there, you can send and return it, and you can choose the harmonic sort of structure you wanna go with. You've also got EQ, so you know you can take off. You don't want to add too much like low and what have you, boosting up the subs. So they're standard, they're sort of taking off the lows. So it's good for generating harmonics that can be heard on smaller speakers, laptops, all that sort of stuff. So as you add them in, again it's subtle. You're going to need headphones and stuff to hear this. So you've got the return and the send. So that's A. Now you can hear that one's got lots more harmonics, and I'm not really sending B yet. So that's just that one. So you can hear what that's adding, and if you look at the frequencies there and look at the levels of these, you can see it pumping the second harmonic, and then you can see it pumping the other harmonics as you add more harmonic. And for the warmth ones, you can add them in as well. And again, look at my levels here. None of this is clipping, it's all harmonics. If you were going into this too hot and you're just clipping your outputs, all you're hearing is clipping, and you're not actually hearing the harmonic generation of the unit. So now you can just flick through and see which different ones are working for you. So that's a really, really nice, like very controlled harmonic generator for, you know, interesting bass sounds and stuff. Now, there was something I was asked earlier about 808s and smashing them. So before I go, I'm going to show you one last thing to do. I think I've got it set up. So I want to send here. I've got a distortion unit, Culture Vulture. I love how Cubase does that. So for all my life, Cubase has loaded post fader, and now you load it and it's pre in a different color. They do an update and change something like that that just really throws you. I just don't understand why they do those updates. I think it's like literally people there who are just like, ha, we're just going to be vindictive and annoy them. But yeah, right, so if we send that over to the Culture Vulture, I'll go and check it before I deafen people, make sure it's set up right. So this is adding harmonic distortion on a send. So I've got it, yeah, it is there. So I'm going to go into a distortion unit on a send, and there's something I'm going to do after that, and after it, it's going to be EQing it. Just a simple EQ will do. And what I'm going to want to do, sorry, I don't want to high, I want to cut. I'm going to take out the low, because as I smash it into this unit, it would just, you know, give me double, because I want to send, it will give me double the thing. So I want to sort of fine tune the frequency of distortion that I'm going to add in here. And that this is covering the sort of like mid-range 808 thing that you could do. There's various things you can do, but this is one of them. So I've sort of covered, you know, I can play with this when we get going, but I've cut from like 2 kilohertz up to about 6, say 7, 8, give us some top end fizz. I've sent it on my, so I wish I had more screens, sent it on my channel here to the Culture Vulture. So now we'll go out, take it off solo. Sorry. Okay. Sorry, chaps. It's deafening. Right, so then we go into the Culture Vulture, so it's actually going through it. So now, like if I go into this frequency and I sweep this back, you'll hear like what's going on here. So the whole signal's being absolutely ramped through there, and then I'm just pulling out what I want. So whatever layer you want to add in, whatever bass frequency you want to pull out, wherever there's room in your mix. You know, you might have rides like sort of up at, like, you know, sometimes I'll put in fizz right up here, but sometimes you might have a break, especially an amen break, where that fizz is getting in the way of the break. So it's nice to be able to have this sort of control with distortion on the send with an EQ afterwards, where you can really choose what frequency range you want to bring that distortion back down into, and poke the hole in your mix where it can fit through, as it were. Oh, we changed them, didn't we? And so on sends, and again, this can be split into different frequencies. So that is like the high. I could do another send and another to take care of my mid. And all it takes is a little bit of filtering or EQing. And then our mid layers are dealt with. So then I can then mix that in to whatever level I want. Now sometimes when you put it on sends, depending on what plugins you're using, you might get some slight, very small latency. So I would always advise you bounce your send and then use it afterwards as a separate track. So, you know, you just bounce it as an individual send. So in Cubase, that would be going to export, audio mix down, and then you do a batch export, go down to your effects, and then just go, I just want the Culture Vulture. And that would send that out. So with that all being done, it's 7 o'clock. We're going to get ready for downstairs. So we're going to wrap up. Thank you to everyone who's been locked on and listening. I'm going to try and do this again in 2 months. So hopefully there'll be more of you here and more of you locked on. And big up to everyone who's been here for the whole time. If you're in Thanet Ramsgate, come on down for tonight. And yeah, here's some vinyl. Hopefully your ears won't get quite so smashed tonight. Big ups and goodbye.
The music shall echo for all time.